I'm going to try to keep it on the shorter side. No promises. But in the event it should start to rip a little bit, we can always, with a few extra words, break out into a reaffirmation of baptism. So we got this covered. We heard today that indeed God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. At this point, I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay. Can you hear me in the back? Come through okay? Good. Great. When Edmund Gravely died at the controls of his small plane while on the way to Statesboro, Georgia, from the Rocky Mount Wilson Airport in North Carolina, his wife, Janice, kept the plane aloft for 2 hours. As the plane crossed the South Carolina-North Carolina border, she radioed for help. Help! Help! Won't someone help me? My pilot is unconscious. Authorities who picked up her distress signal were not able to reach her by radio during the flight because she kept changing channels. Eventually, Mrs. Gravely made a rough landing and had to crawl for 45 minutes to a farmhouse for help. How often God's people cry out to him for help, but switch channels before his message comes through. They turn to other sources for help, looking for human guidance. When you cry out to God for his intervention, don't switch channels. From the book of Genesis all the way through to the book of Revelation, there are many instances in which we read about God being a source of help. We read about God helps you. The Lord helps me. You have been my help. My help is from the Lord. And it goes on time after time after time again throughout the 66 books. I'm sure we have all found ourselves in a time of trouble at some occasion, or maybe some life event, or maybe some trouble within the family or at work. But don't be switching channels. You may say that is what the Israelites did some 3,000 years ago. You remember that over the past few months in our services inside, I kind of set up for you. I tried to put you into the picture a bit. And so I had you kind of in your mind's eye. And as you're facing me, think of yourself as facing north. But the Mediterranean Sea would be over here, the Sea of Galilee over here, the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, and you'd be in Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. So if you think about that, keep that picture in mind. Now, Galilee and Samaria were pretty much 10 of the 12 tribes for the most part, and Judea was the remaining 2 tribes. So it became Israel and Judah. Okay? So Israel and Judah out of the 12 tribes. So here we have Joshua. Okay? He leads the Israelites across the Jordan River, and they conquer Jericho, and they enter into this territory. This is roughly 1300 BC, give or take a few years. And so Joshua is now into the promised land, Canaan, where God had promised to bring them. So they enter this area, and in this area it's already inhabited. The Philistines live there. And they have their own culture, their own way of living, their own way of doing things, their own foods and things that they like to do. And they also like to worship their own gods. They like to worship Dagon and Ashtoreth and Beelzebub. And well, so here come Joshua and the Israelites, and they come into the area, and they want to begin to settle down and take this land over for God, and they encounter these Philistines in there and their way of life. Well, they do take control of certain areas along there, but then in other areas they just let the inhabitants sort of be their slaves and help build things up. Well, as they immerse themselves, as the Israelites immerse themselves in this new territory now, they took on some of the ways and traditions and some of the worship practices of the Philistines who had already been living there. And so these Israelites, they started to worship these pagan gods. And as punishment, God delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. So again, that's roughly 1300 BC, 1200 BC, somewhere around there. Now we're going to jump ahead a little bit to 966, 959 BC. And Solomon builds the temple and his palace. And upon completion of the temple, the Lord appeared to Solomon in the night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for my house of sacrifice. And he goes on with a bit of some words here. But then he says, but if you turn aside and forsake my statutes and my commandments that I have set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will pluck you up from the land that I have given you, and this house which I have consecrated for my name, I will cast out of my sight, and will make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And regarding this house, now exalted, everyone passing by will be astonished and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they adopted other gods and worshiped them and served them. Therefore, he has brought all this calamity upon them. Enter Babylon. Now, where you're sitting here, remember Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, Jordan River, and Israel and Judah. All the way over there, sort of like where the scout camp is Babylon. Okay? So enter Babylon. Now, it's 605 BC. And from 605 BC to about 582, there are 4 invasions. 4 times the Babylonians came, they invaded Jerusalem, and they deported the Jews. They took the Jews and relocated them over to Babylon. The 3rd time that they came to Jerusalem and deported some Jews, they also, at that time, destroyed the temple. But along the way, as they were coming, as the Babylonians were coming, and they were taking this territory and deporting the Jews and destroying the temple, they took many of the instruments, the things that were part of the temple that they used in temple worship in Jerusalem, and they took them also back to Babylon. So, at the beginning of Daniel's life, and he was born about 621 BC roughly, God gives Jerusalem over to the Babylonian king because they were not listening. They were worshiping these pagan gods. And so, again, they deported some of the Israelites, some of the inhabitants of the area to Babylon, and some of the objects from the temple worship. And so now, over in Babylon, in their temple for their pagan gods, they've incorporated some of these instruments used in the temple in Jerusalem. And so they think our gods conquered the God Yahweh. See, we got their instruments in our temple. And Nebuchadnezzar also kind of thought, well, our pagan gods must be with me because we conquered Jerusalem. Well, wrong on both accounts. Now, I don't know about you, but I tend to dream pretty often. You dream pretty often? I dream a lot lately. Not anything that really would terrorize me, I would say. But scientists tell us that we dream every night, and most of the time we enjoy it, but there are some times when we have those dreams that we just want to forget about. Well, the powerful kings throughout history, including the king of Babylon, had dreams too. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and so again, it was about 605 BC when the Babylonians came over into the area. It's about a year later now, and Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It's a rather disturbing dream. And so he wants to summon 4 groups of men. They are basically like his cabinet, the king's cabinet, his advisors. And they were also closely connected to the Babylonian religious system and had claimed to have this ability to predict the future. So Nebuchadnezzar had hundreds of these advisors. They were magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, fortune tellers. But he's not exactly sure how much they really know or how much they can really be trusted. So if I tell you I had a dream last night and I told you what that dream was, you can come up with your own mind of what interpretation of what that was about, what my dream was about. Well, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want these four groups of people just to come up with their thoughts and ideas on what his dream was about. He wants to really know that they're telling the truth and have an idea. And so he not only wants them to interpret the dream, but tell me the dream. And that way, he will know that they know what they're talking about. So when we have our dreams, we seem to assume that our dreams reveal something about our subconscious. Or maybe we just had a bad dinner, who knows. But when we have a dream, and so, I don't know, sometimes I'm just thinking back to childhood, I often used to watch Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and all those kind of action heroes. And in my dreams as a child, I often used to don my own cape and be a superhero in my own right. And so if I would say, well, that was my dream, you could offer me the interpretation. And usually it's about revealing something about ourselves. Well, for societies like the Babylonians, they often interpret their dreams in what it means for beyond themselves, for the external world, for what's going to happen down the road. So the Babylonians, they kept records of their dreams. It's sort of like if we might keep a journal of our dreams. They kept records of their dreams and the events that followed them. And so the advisors could come and they could look back and say, oh, so the king had this dream, and we encountered this before. This is, what the king dreamed about. And so when someone dreamed about that in the past, this is what happened. And so that's what Nebuchadnezzar was worried about. He doesn't want to know what has happened for someone else or just have them sort of like shoot a dart and see if they can get it on target. He wants to really know that they can interpret these dreams. But in reality, these experts, they have no more insight than Nebuchadnezzar does. So the fortune tellers, they came to him and said, nobody anywhere can do what you ask. We can't tell you your dream. And no king, great or small, has ever demanded anything like this from any magician, enchanter, or fortune teller. What you're asking is impossible unless some god or goddess should reveal it. And they don't hang around with people like us. So these fortune tellers, they're telling Nebuchadnezzar right away up front, these gods that we worship, they don't hang around us. They don't talk to us. That set the king off. He was not happy. He lost his temper and ordered the whole company of Babylonian wise men killed. When the death warrant was issued, Daniel and his companions were included. They also were marked for execution. Help! Can you imagine being in that situation? Help! When Eckroth, chief of the royal guards, was making arrangements for the time of execution, Daniel wisely took him aside and quietly asked him what is going on. Why this all of a sudden? And Eckroth filled in the background of all that had transpired, and Daniel went to the king and asked for a little time so that he could interpret the dream. Then Daniel went to his home and informed his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and told them, look, guys, we need to do some serious praying. There's a lot of trouble down the road. Told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions with the rest of the wise men of Babylon might not perish. And so then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. And Daniel blessed the God of heaven. You see, Daniel knows a God who does reach down to us, indeed. And he knows a God that he can reach up to. He simply tells the king that, okay, I'll take on this test. And he rushes home to tell his friends that they better pray. So Daniel doesn't really panic all that much, but he courageously steps forward and meets the challenge and wisely gave God time to do God's work. Daniel was confident. He trusted that God wouldn't fail him. Usually, our first reaction in a time of trouble is to seek out our own resources, use our own power to resolve them. And we often turn to God as a last resort when everything else seems to have been exhausted. But I suggest to you, come to God in prayer. When you're in time of trouble, come to God in prayer. Give God some time to do God's work. And then trust that God will hear and answer your prayers. So Daniel, he went back to Eckroth, who had been put in charge of the execution, and said, "Call off the execution. Take me to the king and I'll interpret his dream." And Eckroth, he didn't lose a minute here. He ran to the king and he brought Daniel right along with him. "I found a man from the exiles of Judah who can interpret the king's dream." And the king asked Daniel, "Are you sure you can do this? Tell me the dream I had and interpret it for me." So Daniel answered the king, "No mere human can solve the king's mystery. I don't care who it is, no wise man, enchanter, magician, diviner. But there is a God in heaven who solves mysteries, and he has solved this one. He is letting King Nebuchadnezzar letting him in on what is going to happen in the days ahead. At the same time, he is putting the Israelites' God, Yahweh, on top of the Babylonian pagan gods. This is the dream you had when you were lying on your bed, the vision that filled your mind. While you were stretched out on your bed, O king, thoughts came to you regarding what is coming in the days ahead. The revealer of mysteries showed you what will happen, but the interpretation is given through me. Not because I am any smarter than anyone else in the country, but that so you will know what it means, so that you will understand what you dreamed." So Daniel prefaced his interpretation with a lesson on the nature of Yahweh. You see, the gods in Nebuchadnezzar's experience, they were limited in power. Really, they didn't really have any power at all. They were limited in power. Daniel's God was the God of all power and God of all knowledge. Nebuchadnezzar thought Israel's military defeat was a sign that Babylon's gods were more powerful than Israel's gods. But you know what, King Nebuchadnezzar? You're wrong. The God of Israel was the one who allowed Babylon to conquer Israel. The dream. What you saw, O king, was a huge statue standing before you, striking in appearance and terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold, the chest and arms were silver, the belly and hips were bronze, the legs were iron, and the feet were an iron ceramic mixture. While you were looking at this statue, a stone cut out of a mountain by an invisible hand hit the statue, smashing its iron ceramic feet. Then the whole thing fell to pieces. Iron, tile, bronze, silver, gold, smashed to bits. Can you imagine how King Nebuchadnezzar felt? His kingdom was going to collapse. It will provide no legacy for Nebuchadnezzar. He is king now, but only by God's will. The rule of empire doesn't happen out of the control of Yahweh, the God of Israel. God gives empires their power and uses them to bring about good for the people. Or in cases like this, to bring trouble to those who deserve it, as in this case of Babylon coming and taking over Jerusalem. It's a reminder to Nebuchadnezzar that he shouldn't think he's in power because of his own achievements. And it's also a reminder to those from Judah that they shouldn't think he has a power that makes him independent of God. God helped Daniel, and God can help you. Daniel called upon God for help, and God responded. Part of Psalm 121. I look up toward the mountains. Where can I find help? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. The Lord guards you as you come and go, now and forever. Our Father God, the Alpha, the Omega, the great I Am, is the source of our help. Think of times in your life when there was no help anywhere to be found. Think of those times then when you sought help from sources that just didn't provide any help at all. Sometimes people disappoint. The solutions you tried came up empty. You felt alone. Look up to the mountains. Look up to the hills. Fix your gaze up there. What you've been aching for, what you're longing for, lies there, as in Matthew 6:33. Steep your life in God's reality, in God's initiative, in God's provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. What do you need help with today? Perhaps a family member, family situation. Perhaps a situation at work. Probably maybe some situation in the community, maybe financial issues. God knows you. God's got you. He will attend to your needs. God will watch over your comings and your goings and will be there to protect you. Lift your eyes to the high places today. And when you do, you'll see your help cresting the mountain. Don't be switching channels. For truly, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble. Thanks be to God.